Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Elon 11, and this is a comics podcast. This is a comics podcast for people who get really excited when writers they love take on characters they love, so much so that they can't figure out a humorous and self-referential episode opening. That's right. Award-winning comics writer and now RPG designer and sometime DJ, Kieron Gillen, returns to the podcast. He's been on here before to talk about Young Avengers, Phonogram, which still holds the Elon 11 award for the most Elon 11 comic ever written, The Wicked and the Divine, and most recently to talk about Die, Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, and the Eternals, who he compared to the Supremes. It was awesome. You should go listen to those episodes. And today he joins me to talk about his return to the world of the X-Men in the new series Immortal X-Men. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. I was like, that enormous list makes me remember. I've been on here a lot, A, and B, oh my God, we're so old.
Yeah, for real. Well, I feel very lucky. I'm really glad that you made time for this because I know you have a great new exciting addition in your family. So thanks for coming back.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and it's like it's delightful. As in, like, kind of people listening, I've just had a child has entered our house, so I have I've just sort of inched back from the parental leave, so I'm in this position now where I'm kind of I don't think I'm full work yet, but I'm still sort of writing scripts now and doing childcare. So there's not much other than childcare and writing at the moment. So this is a blessed break and a reminder that I can speak to humans and not just sing. So I spend most of my time just singing at the child. That's my main thing. It's pretty impressive.
That's awesome. What is your favorite song to sing to the child, especially if it's like not from the standard canon of songs one sings to a child?
I've changed lyrics to literally anything. But the shocking thing is, it's Silent Night. I just can't stop singing Silent Night here because it absolutely works. I sing it straight. I still haven't looked up all the lyrics, so I keep on forgetting the middle bit. But like, it really genuinely puts it to sleep. If I was going to choose the iconic song of this period, it's me singing Silent Night, and it's slightly out of my vocal. You know, there's bits which you can hear me straining, which I don't know. Right. She seems very into it though. So yeah.
She doesn't know that you're, going to the edges of your range. It's just... Yeah.
So there has been some full phonogram stuff where the first time a record's played, I've sort of anyway, honey, this is the specials. The specials were they're taking like a two-tone, which is a kind of ska revival. This is about Coventry and the British working life in the early 80s, etc., etc.
So thankful that you were raising a generation of children who I won't have to yell at on Twitter about them saying flippant things about ska based on their illusion that American third wave is the entire genre. So thank you for doing your service.
I will. Inevitably there will be a rebellion against that, and she'll only listening to the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones or something. But that's a risk we'll have to take.
Yes, well, it'll happen when the time comes. Yes, I have thought about adding yelling at you about ska on the internet to my Twitter bio at this point because it just comes up so often. It's sad. So it would be easy to just talk about music the whole time. Although I will say that our first inkling of what was to come with the X-Men was you releasing an Immortal X-Men playlist featuring 1919 by John Cale, which is a stunning piece of music, and including many other very interesting surprises. For folks who haven't checked out the playlist, it's a Spotify list, and I recommend you do so. But I'm wondering, Kieron, 1919 is when this issue starts, and it's the first song. Is it generally to be taken as a playlist that moves through the series as you see it laid out?
Yes and no. Partially yes, but mainly no. In that it's very much a working playlist, as in, I'm still adding stuff to it, and like tweaking and moving stuff around. And it's normally when a series is over, you get the kind of like, this is definitive order. But at the same time, there's definitely some kind of structure there. Like there's certain probably it's kind of stuff at the end, probably stuff at the end and stuff right at the beginning. You see, like you say, it starts with Paris 19. It's exactly the same as the comic. There's some allusions to that record in that first scene when you read the whole thing. And then the next song it's the knife, isn't it? It's the colouring of pigeons. No, it's Utopia. Actually, let me just click. I've got my computer here.
I'm about to open it myself.
Yeah. So it's a bit like I set up there's a bit like setting up some
Utopia
of the themes. Yeah, and it's also part of it's listenable, and it's also a selection of the moods. It's weird, like Immortal X-Men, that's the sort of mood I've sort of ended up in. And there's definitely some other stuff I want to add. It's kind of vaguely apocalyptically rock, emergent stuff I imagine that was played by adults in the 1980s in cool dinner parties, which I wouldn't get to go to. And random bits of classical music. Really just depressed stuff. Weird cover versions about the future. I mean, if I had to choose a single track to actually get the mood of what I think my Immortal is going for, it's The Colouring of Pigeons, which is a collaboration between The Knife, Empty Sims, and Planet Rock. And it was, if people don't know it, it's basically the whole thing was a musical performance based around Darwin. So The Colouring of Pigeons is referring to, of course, the changing of the colouring of pigeons in evolutionary sense. And it's a wonderful piece of music because, obviously it's about evolution. It's about change. It's about, Sinister's one of the main characters and there's a Darwin aspect there. And also specifically, it sounds like this weirdly glacial, perfect society. There's something, that bit in The Fifth Element where the opera singer sings and they kind of do some really fun stuff musically there. It's a little bit like that. It's the closest I can imagine mutant culture sounding like. The Colouring of Pigeons. So that's Krakoa in some ways.
That's great.
Yeah. And it's not, for better or worse, because the Colouring of Pigeons is not a comforting record. Like, that's definitely, I'm kind of interested in the push and pull of Krakoa. And that, especially the Quiet Council, it's elevated. It's not Krakoan life, it's Krakoan politics. So, like, there's something about that. Imagine if you walk into Krakoa, I think or at least you walk into the Quiet Council, the Colouring of Pigeons will be playing. If you're down on the beach, it's going to be very different. I've got another playlist called Immortal X-Men After Dark, because I deliberately removed anything that was really danceable and fun from the playlist, because it broke the mood. If there's ever a more silly about, I mean, you've read the first issue. It's not fun, but at the same time, like there's a sugar over a cyanide dish in that way.
That definitely carries a lot of foreboding, but also a lot of humor, because you're writing from the POV of Sinister for almost the entire issue. And that's always going to be funny in your hands. I love that your reinvention of Sinister is one of those things that has carried over into the age of Hoxpox. It was a modern contemporary reimagining of a character that has continued into this reimagined modern series, just undoubtedly so. And I think you've sort of defined in your earlier series, like what Sinister is now for like the current X-Men world. That's pretty cool, right?
It's amazing when something sticks. I mean, I don't mean that sounds sarcastic, but I really like when you're with the hire, you got to really tell if your peers like what you've done, if they use it. And sometimes it's not even then, it's like, if they've been paying attention. So when I first saw Jonathan use Sinister in Secret Wars, that was kind of like, oh, Jonathan likes my stuff. You know what I mean? Like, and it was a complete surprise to me as anyone. And it's been a delight, it's kind of, especially when I sat down and did the reinvention of Sinister back in my run, it was very much, this character isn't quite working. Like, how can we make him work? And I threw a lot of ideas at the page, and people have got honed in on the best one. And now I get to pick up on this Sinister, a decade on. Because that's kind of the fun thing of it, that I'm not just going back to what I wrote. I'm also, I'm very much yes-handing what other people have written. At the same time, also still going, okay, I see aspects of Sinister I want to bring to the fore again. Because I think it's been a bit fun to be around. Like, and it's still fun to be around now, but I want to really kind of dig back. Oh no, he's a villain, and he's a proper villain in that kind of way. And in which case it becomes, especially in this first issue, you say, oh no, him being funny is manipulating people. There's that's just because, and there's a lot more of that in terms of likability as a weapon. And Sinister, essentially has realised being a little bit fun and, he's more fun to be with. That. It's a joke. At least there's something people say in British, at least they buy their round at the bar. They'll say that about somebody, and that means the basic level of decent, they'll buy a round at the bar. That says nothing. That's how they'll buy you a few drinks. It doesn't say anything about what's going on inside them. So I wanted the sinisterness of Sinister to come back beneath it. I don't know. I've got a lot of ideas, me.
Yes. But I don't think we ever got to I don't think you and I have ever really spoken about X-Men at length before. Although I feel like at some point I made my enthusiasm for the existence of the character unit that you invented audible. But when you began reinventing Sinister a decade ago, what was it that you felt like wasn't working about him that you then were able to transform to the point where now he really is a character that people are excited to see in stories? Like he kind of was the center of Hellions in some ways,
Oh, it's so good. Hellions was also, I cried. Did you cry at the end? I cried at the end of Hellions. It was so good. Really, I cried. I would say I cry easily, but I definitely I was properly moved as poor, Nanny Maker. Not Nanny Maker. That's that's a great character. Nanny Maker.
Oh God, even worse.
I'll just get on the phone to Jordan. Jordan, I've got an idea for a book.
Orphan Maker, yeah.
It's funny, like as a writer, especially for work for hire, I kind of move between two modes. Like when I'm first hired to do a job, I'm working from the outside in. Okay, and I'm stepping back and looking at a book and going, okay, what's going on here? Like, why is this book not selling as well as it should? Or, I'm aware of why Marvel has hired me. I'm not always coming from my own, and then I'm not always coming from my own ideas of what am I doing as an artist. I'm very much going, if it's worth a hire, I'm being hired for a reason. And then I also find a thing that I find artistically valid, which also serves the purpose, and, everything gets balanced. So at that kind of stage, you sort of step outside. I'm not really thinking about like my favorite characters. I'm thinking about like, okay, why is this character ended up where they are? And he's taken that very big, it's a critic's eye view, basically. Mm-hmm. In the case of Sinister, I've said this about Exodus in a mail recently, he was hit hard by the 90s stick.
Yeah.
And it's that bit like, there's a lot of really good ideas in there, but none of them have been picked, really. And it's like, there was never really a sense of who he was or what he wanted, because the 90s was about the idea of these endless plots about people being Machiavellian and trying to set things up. And the writers always changed too quickly, so none of the plans came to fruition. So it's never, and the fact that characters changed hands as much as it did means it's never really a sense of any real individual desire of him. So like, the first thing for me was, okay, let's drill down. Like, let's give him something he wants. And in case of like, when I was writing him, it was he views as evolutionary competitiveness. He wants to win the evolutionary war. So I made him as a species. Sinister as, that was his goal. And that's why he's been studying mutants, because mutants are the emergent species and then the competition. And if you kind of look at Sinister through that filter now, it's like, if you can't beat them, join them. That's where Sinister, that's literally what he's done. And another question was like, you bring up stuff and that makes you think it's interesting. So I was like, there's a lot of like random scientists. So you're always trying to make, okay, what makes this scientist different? And I think about this all characters, like if a character's super strength, it's like when people have the same powers, I try to think about how are they different. So like for me, Hulk is strong in a very different way than Thor is. And all that. In the case of Sinister, it's okay, he's an evil geneticist scientist. Okay, there's a lot of them around. Why is he different? So like, and they end up picking that apart. And for me, this is the point where I changed from what's the problem with him to deep dive into the continuity. So like I went back and obviously the original idea for Sinister never ever happened. The idea was essentially a thought projection by, teenage Scott, which is a great idea for a character, but that for me, that was gone. That was just like, it had been lost in the mix. So I went back to his in-canon origin. He's a 19th century. He knew Darwin, and that was kind of like immediately interesting. Okay, he's a 19th century dude. There's a perspective. I can write him as a 19th century geneticist, a very different kind of perspective. And I ended up going into the 19th century ideas of science and all that. And then they'd be like, okay, who's more fun to be around? So I made him a bit Oscar Wilde. You know what I mean? Especially because the idea there's nothing at the bottom. The idea of if there's not really a personality, because part of his origin was he kind of gave up who he was because he didn't want to be that person anymore. And the idea, once you've let go of any sense of who you are for whatever reason, you're rudderless. So I kind of view Sinister as this thing with no bottom. It's just a void down there. And that's when I was that's kind of one of the things when I did when I reinvented him. He was the first you see is he's a clone. He makes a new clone. He's tweaked his personality. And no, that's wrong. And he kills himself and tries again. And the idea of like the photocopying of him, and and because that was always my back door, because I was aware that if people didn't like what I did, they Sinister go, oh no, I'll go to the backup and go with that guy instead. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I was like, I was trying to be polite with my meddling. I think the single idea I think that I most like about where Sinister ended up, and it wasn't like the big idea. It wasn't about the idea of the imperialism, except in a kind of indirect area. Well, it's the idea of Sinister sees mutants, because most people mutant villains hate mutants. Sinister loves mutants, but he doesn't see them as people. He thinks the only thing that's interesting about mutants is their genes. You know what I mean? Like he literally objectifies people. And what Sinister's gift is, and when I say gift is, by which I mean how he sees the world, is like he is somebody who appropriates things and uses it in ways which you couldn't do if you saw them as a person. Like there's a throwaway, we referenced this in the first issue, but like there's a bit in the first time I wrote him, he had a gun that fired Cyclops eyeballs, which is it's a funny gag. I'm saying this, I think it's a funny gag, but it also says, you know what I mean? It's like if somebody looks at Cyclops and goes, I can make a gun out of that. And that's fun. You know what I mean? And that's fun, but also terrifying. That's kind of what I think's like, that you boil down Sinister to. Wildian aptitude, bits of 19th century, like high drag aesthetics, you know, 'cause he's drifted more 20th century as we've gone along, as other writers have taken him. And an industrialist or colonialist approach to genetic content. That's the kind of the core, and that's why he's scary. That's why he's a bad guy, you know?
Right.
So that was the kind of the core thinking of me. And that's kind of where is now, I think if you went to my original document and mailed it to you, you'd be interested, like the stuff I didn't stick. Cause as per usual with me, there's always too many ideas. And kind of the great joy of, really, I mean, it's a mess. It's not, okay, that's not fair. It's a lot. It's not necessarily a mess. It's just a lot. And the great joy of having gone through a number of people's hands now is, I can imagine Sinister approving. This is survival of the fittest. You know, all those ideas have been released. They competed, and we got down to the ones that really worked. If you will, a very pure diamond, this pure red diamond of Sinister, which I now have to pick up and then put a different spin on. You know, it's fun. You know, but like obviously I'm somebody who loves to create her own work, but this is a really interesting work for hire challenge. I mean, this is kind of unlike taking over Immortal. It's very different from almost any job I've ever done, in that I'm aggressively leaning into the status quo that exists. Like I want to pick up where Jonathan left off. You know, in that. And partially because the Office is such an amazing, I say Jonathan, I mean, because we follow Inferno so tightly. What I really mean is the continuity of the Office, as it works so well as this sort of anarchist commune supporting one another. And I really wanted to do something which was additional to that, but also a big new input. Because I've been watching as a reader, and so I've been watching it from the outside and going, you know, if I was these characters, this is what I would be doing. And you kind of get that in the first issue with Sinister, in that kind of the whole big twist at the end of the first issue, which I won't spoil yet in this podcast. Yeah. You know, the whole big twist is me going, okay, if I was Sinister, this is what I would do.
You know, I from the beginning of the dawn of X, it was really clear to me how much myself and my friends wanted there to be an X-Men series that was focused on the capital P politics of Krakoa, within the mutant community, as well as without. And I'm so glad that we just suddenly got one, and that it was, you know, it's being written by someone who like actually really cares about politics with the capital P as well. So this was just a perfect matchup. Did you pitch the series, or was it something, or were they like, hey, Kieron, come write something for X, and you come up with it with, you know, you come up with what it is? Or was Jonathan like, we need to have a series that focuses on the Quiet Council?
I was approached just saying, hey, Kieron, do you want to do a Quiet Council book? It was that simple. And I think because at that point, we knew that Jonathan was going to leave the office. So I was approached in that kind of, hey, Jonathan's leaving. Are you interested in doing a Quiet Council book building off what became Inferno? Was it called Inferno then? Yeah, I think it was called Inferno then still. So no, it was always explicitly come and do it. And I think I've said this in other interviews. I only realized it halfway through an interview. I was like, oh yeah, this would be the book Jonathan would be doing if he was still in the office, isn't it? You know, the high-level Krakoan book. That's kind of his jam. So in like, that's how I think they picked me, because I'm somebody who is interested in politics, both capital P and small p as well. And I mean, you know, there are people going around a table voting and being Machiavellian. That's very much my jam, especially like a decade on. Like, you know, I think there's so interesting. If you compare the two playlists, you get a sense of where the two books are coming from. Like this feels an older book. You know what I mean? Like, I've been around the block a few times. And I think that's very, very much visible. But to flip it around.
I'm sorry, which is the other playlist? You said the other playlist?
Oh, my original. If you dig out my Uncanny X-Men, I had one from Uncanny X-Men back in the day.
Oh, wow. Like, okay.
Yeah, compare and contrast. And it's like that. It's much more kind of pugnacious, like the old one is. That one is arranged almost chronologically. You can almost see characters' beats. Like the entire of the magic subplot is the Confide in Me by Kylie Minogue.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to look that up later. Thank you.
It's a fun playlist, I think.
But yeah, you know, one of the things that I'm always thinking about is, as people who are like definitionally anti-monarchist, we read these stories like, for example, Black Panther, and now, you know, X-Men with the Quiet Council, in which there's characters who you're sort of like, oh, I love this person, but they're actually serving as a ruler in a system that is not a political system. That is what any of us would design. It's always, it's complicated. And it feels like it's something that gets avoided in a lot of stories, like actually talking about that. Because this X-Men political system, like this whole time I've been like, oh, their political system is is completely bullshit. And I hope they get around to like dealing with that. And now I'm like, oh, I have a feeling that they might know. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think about like that conflict that we have when we're reading stories about that?
I think it's kind of like, I mean, part of it, the pat answer is part of it's what fiction's for. You know, the idea that fiction, we can take stuff we don't necessarily agree with and play with it in that way. Like, and you have different characters, and like the council have very different opinions, and you can sort of play those games of personalities. We can watch it out, and ideas can wrestle. And you know, the distance of fiction allows us to do stuff like that, which is not like saying fiction isn't, you know, doesn't have impact on reality and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, fiction is important because you can step back and do things which are immoral. You know, like, I mean, a lot of my work is about people who I find desperately immoral. You know, I'm very interested in writers, why people do bad things and why they self-justify. Like, that's the, you know, I mean, that's the, because this might be a Catholic thing, but like, being good is really easy. Like in my head, it's like, you know, everyone knows what to be good is. If everyone was good, it'd be easy. The problem is, it's like, we're not. We generally don't. We tend to be a fallen species. But dialing back to I mean, you're right. And of course, unpacking the problems of like fictional setups is occasionally part of the thing. In the case of Krakoa, it's like the whole part of Krakoa for me is that you know, Krakoa will go on forever because we're all immortal now. Can they, how will the system shake down? Because like Immortal just gives you more chance of the problems to either collapse the system or not. I mean, I found myself thinking, I mean, I went through a period like beginning of lockdown year reading, I finally started to read a proper history of China, like from beginning, because I wanted to be able to know the dynasties in order. Not like a deep history, but that kind of, you know, the really basic, do I know which dynasty becomes in which order? You know, that kind of really basic question. And I do now, and I know roughly what they're like and what period they're in. Don't test me, but like, you know, roughly,
I couldn't, but yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's the thing, like, and it's that ability to understand, because it's kind of came from, if we did this whole issue across 6,000 years of culture, should record 90 years each time. And that high level of human culture made me basically, there's almost 4,000 years of basically, if I was being honest, I would probably skip between Egypt and China if I was really talking about what was most important going on in the world at any time. Like how long this stuff has been going on for. But the one thing that took is like, you know, all of those empires lasted about 300 years, like all before they collapsed in on themselves. And, you know, they all thought they were mortal in different ways. You know, you can sort of say whether, you know, obviously there's continuity between different empires that, you know, Rome didn't fall for a very long time, but in a real way, 300 years is about all an empire gets. And I found myself thinking about that, looking at America, for example, looking at Russia, actually looking at, you know, I mean, like all these kind of, everything seems immortal until it doesn't. And the case of the X-Men, the challenge is how can we make a society which protects our people forever, ideally? How can we make sure this doesn't fuck up? You know, and I think all those and the push and pulls between that and all the serpents in the crib. Like, what do you mean? What do you do when you accidentally got, you know, a Stalin on the Quiet Council? Because, you know, as somebody who leans quite, you know, I lean left, as you know, like, one of my questions I always ask is, not always ask, but I spend a lot of time thinking about is how to have a revolution that doesn't end badly. You know, because revolutions also have a historical tendency to crush marginalized people too. And those kind of questions I think are really important. So all that kind of stuff's in my head. And that's at least and something like the Quiet Council or like a fictional thing, you get to play with the ideas in a way which is both dramatic, but also it has to be at a slight distance, because there's people on the Quiet Council we would never ever accept in real life or want ruling in real life. But as a fiction, we can play games with them. And hopefully we can put them a test tube almost, because there's a Petri dish over them.
Well, I mean, the thing that you're doing here is just like something that would have really self-organized from the start, is like you're actually building political factions within the Quiet Council that aren't just mapping based on who was on a team with each other before, but are more mapped on what their political analysis of a situation is. It's beginning to just dive into like, what are the political factions where in a space where the options aren't just like Magneto, Xavier, and generalized evil, you know? Yeah.
It's not, I mean, like, yeah, that's the idea, especially because this is one of the things you said earlier, that this is the run more than any that builds on something previously. Me starting, my first thing was, okay, this is how I see the Quiet Council right now. So I wrote little short essays on each of them, as in this is where I thought they were. And this is built upon just seeing where they've been, what they want. And thinking, you know, which is interesting. Talking about this, I'm aware that it sounds like it's a book about the ideas and the politics and the abstracts. except it's not as well. It's also a book about the people, the soft politics. I can't stand that guy, and that's the soft politics is very specific. And that's also like this, there's a real character-based stuff, I think, in the book as well. I think one of the main devices I'm using is that every issue is narrated by a different character. Like the first issue is Sinister. The second issue is, I can't be good to spoil it. Hope. Second issue is Hope. Because
good.
We're now Hopes. So, and then we kind of go from there. And I'll keep that up as long as it serves the story. And then the second it doesn't, I'll stop. That's very much, and it's not means that the whole issue is from their perspective. Like you see in the first issue, there's a whole scene with Exodus and Hope, which Sinister isn't around. And there's more of that. I'm not going to slow the story down just to do character focus episodes. But at the same time, there's significant character focus.
So you're saying you're not going to let yourself get trapped in formalism?
Oh, no, I thought, okay, yeah. I was joking. This isn't formal. No, I'm just mentioning it is. It would be, no. Am I getting more formal? Oh, it's pretty formalistic. The fact I started with a homage to, the scene from Hawks, says a lot. That kind of, they're on the bench, they're whispering to each other. Yeah, I'm doing it again. But it's interesting because the thing about doing a story about immortality, one of the things I've said before, it stretches forward and back. Like, obviously, immortality continues forever, but several of these people have been alive for a long time. Like Raven, Irene, Nathaniel, about 200 years. Magneto, like early 20th century. Exodus, as you say, he's Crusades. He spent most of that time in a sleep capsule. He's kind of Captain America, but more so. But he's been around for a long time. Selene turns up in the first issue. 17,000 years, that girl. So history also goes back. And the idea, I found myself thinking, I know this is the most pretentious thing I'm ever going to say, but I'm thinking about I've started drawing the Shaw issue recently, which surprised me because he's a character I thought was going to be less important than he's ended up being. And there's something, I've realized something almost Proustian to what I'm doing in places in terms of how I'm hitting memories. And I'm not going deep Proust or anything, not that, because I haven't read Proust, but my understanding of that as okay, let's just hit these memories of these people who've been around for a long time. And it's definitely one of the things we stretch forward a long way as well, which is fun too.
Stretch forward a long way, meaning?
The idea, there's always an X-Men thing about what's the future going to be. And in some ways they argue about what is Krakoa's future. That, when we're doing future timeline stuff, and that's always been a traditional thing in the X-Men. What you really say, a future timeline stuff is saying, how can things go right and wrong? And it's ways of externalizing the internal debates. And that's kind of what I think, that's, we talk about the X-Men metaphor a lot. And the thing about the X-Men metaphor is one of the things, it's a heavy duty lifting metaphor because it's being a metaphor for a lot of things simultaneously. And occasionally they're in conflict. And that's why you have to sort of step back and realize the metaphor isn't actuality too. You know what I mean? Like there's always a conflict between all these things. Where was I? Yeah. That's what I think the book's tried to do anyway. And also being a big part of this tapestry. I think that's the other thing, though, reason why I came back to do it was I've never worked in an office like the X office, so I wanted to, it sounded great from the outside. Let's try it, see if I like it. And, and I did love, there's a little bit of I'm surprising no one, there's some meta, but the idea that Magneto leaves the Quiet Council in the first opening scene, not the opening scene, but the opening of the issue, really, it's the inciting instant. That's very much, and Jonathan has left the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. In a real way, the X-Office of Krakoa, and Jonathan is Magneto. He's the radical who has brought us all together.
I love it.
Yeah. It's also been in the office and seeing how Jonathan absolutely inspired people. There's been some people obviously being completely from the outside. People say, "Oh no, Jonathan's plan was blown up, etc., etc." And that's never, it just doesn't seem like that. Jonathan's plan was to put, give strength to all these voices and bring them together to do something bigger than any one voice. He wants to create a whole new different way of doing superhero comics, and he did it. John's a very clever dude.
Yeah, no, it's really beautiful, and it feels like this is how much more of the shared universe building that happens in comics should be working. At least when I see.
Yeah, I meant to say, actually, this is the other thing about it. I also realised, it's invited me back. I don't think I would have done a book if it wasn't the Quiet Council book, which is the very weird thing to realise that, if John hadn't gone, I wouldn't be here. And it's just because, where I am now, a lot of the other sort of books in the X office I've kind of done. I did something a bit like that. But an actual high level mutant politics book is, with the weird austere pop music to it, I hadn't done. You know what I mean? So it felt, which is a depressive thing to think about because I would have loved to expressly do a book that dances with Jonathan more closely. In fact, we talked about doing sort of sharing the first few issues of Immortal for a while. Like I wrote half, he wrote half, but that ended up not shaking down for various reasons. Yeah.
Well, it definitely feels like this is in continuity with the series. So don't fear on that. But it's interesting also, just sort of, it's like, oh, now I'm going to get to write it, and I guess Magneto has to go, which is always a bit of like, and I totally get it. But and the cast shift. I mean, in some ways, you're inheriting you're inheriting a certain cast and players and where they're located from where the series is set up. But you're also getting to make a couple of very specific picks for who's being added to that tapestry here.
It is. It's like, actually, I've just realized something I want to stress, because I know what the X fandom is like. It's like, when I say that, there's the meta reading, it's not why I did it. You know what I mean? Like, Magneto leaving was very much about other things. It just made a lot of sense for something like that to shake up the Quiet Council, and Magneto in a place which Al's exploring very much in X-Men Red, or why he would do it. So like, it wasn't that. It was much more me stepping back and thinking, oh no, this absolutely is metaphorically what Johns did. Skipping back to the pick. So one reason I wanted to hope on the council is, just the 5 seemed really important. That was at least partly, this becomes a character moment instead of like the meta reading. It was like, Hope seems to be quiet and actually weirdly compliant, considering she is, shall we say, not always that way. She is Cable's girl, if you will.
Yeah.
And the idea that she is the means of production, if you will, or the means of reproduction as well. And the idea that there's a kind of, I want to say in this now, and where that would lead, that struck me as interesting, especially because she's a very different perspective than the rest of the room. And at that point, I was thinking about people like Exodus. I mean, Exodus is the character I feel, I think I've said this, that if Sinister was the character I was most trying to twist and give a different view on, so if Sinister was the one in my first time in the X office, I think Exodus is the one I'm most trying to give a twist to. I'm most kind of like, I don't think it's quite as hard a twist as I did to Sinister, but it's kind of like a digging into what's interesting about it. And it's that kind of like, in the same way, as we said earlier, Exodus has been alive for like nearly 1,000 years, but he was slept for most of it. So the Captain America him is real. The question of his faith is very real. And how do you, especially his warped mutant Catholicism, that really interests me. And like how you would like square all those, they said I was raised Catholic. So like there's Catholicism all over my work. And one of the weird things about having a kid, but also the lockdown years, I've really kind of become hyper aware about work I find powerful that is rooted from Catholic places. Even if I don't quote unquote believe it anymore, the idea of how much I order my idea of the world around. Like I never really thought about, Lord of the Rings being a formative work for me in a very real way. I've never thought about Tolkien's Catholicism before I wrote Die. Or like I was thinking about why have I got into the Hold Steady? Like the Hold Steady are a band I've never really, I've always sort of half been aware of, but I got into a hard 2 years ago, and I couldn't really work out why I was into them as much, because I don't often listen to male rock bands anymore. And they're a very male rock band. And then it was like, the entire second album's about Catholicism. The drunken Catholicism aspect and all the, fallen people and all that kind of stuff. Right, that stuff responds to you very powerfully. So, and I think one of the best, or at least most disturbing issues of Wick did was the nun issue, like the nun Lucifer. And that's I remember like my friends like Katie and Chrissy pretty much looking at each other going, what the hell's going on here? In that, look at the weird Catholic doing Catholic stuff. And that's kind of some of the energy I'm bringing to Exodus in a very different way.
I see it. Yeah.
I have no idea what people will make of it, because it's so much, he's quirky in that way, but at the same time, there's something like really how he sees the world, and you take it seriously. And especially like him and Shaw, like if you take those characters seriously as leads for a second and look at their lives and think, okay, how do you best explain them? You see them as different, because when characters are me trying to treat each of the cast members as a lead character in their issue is really letting me open them up. Like I said, the Shaw issue has made me go, this is really, he's a more interesting person than I thought. I don't think I'm going to get anything revelatory about it, but some good stuff there, I think. And it's like, and they just sit heavy. It's like, I'm really looking forward to the Xavier issue, which is like I've got some deep dives into Xavier, and it's mixed. It's a really big political book. It's a big plot book. Lots of big stuff happens, but it's always through this tight focus on the people, and what makes them tick. And you get to, and you know them by the end of the issue a bit better, I hope.
I hope people like it. Yes. Well, I know that when I asked actually on the Cerebro Discord, like folks had questions for you, and everybody had talking about Exodus. You mentioned, how he spent a lot of time in his stasis chamber and the Captain America Man of Timepiece. I'm really fascinated by him continuing to be like this religious alkalite who's a true believer, and like that is his viewpoint in the world. And, his whole thing with bringing in Hope. I mean, Hope's a character you've written before. And also the, White Council has been missing the voice of a young person this entire time. So that, that was a great combination. But I literally got a listener question that was like, does Exodus appreciate modern music?
That sounds literally, if you could define my readership, that would be it in this kind of, I don't think he does. I mean, another podcast asked me this recently. And often one of my pet bugbears is people writing superhero comics and having the characters like cooler music than they should. You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of superheroes don't have cool taste in music. And I did a whole, as both of us know, I did an entire series about unpacking the poisonous of the concept of cool. But like for listeners who don't know me well, when I say cool music, I mean people who are obsessively into pop culture in that way. I don't think that not a lot of superhero characters are. Some are. I bet like, I don't know, Emma Frost knows her stuff. And Emma Frost, because you throw parties. If you know throw parties, you need to know a bit more. But Exodus, Exodus is probably still freaked out. With a person at a time, you always like how much you lean into it. He's probably weirded out by if someone plays like a sixth, he's still like, oh, burn the organ. You should be playing sixths. That's the devil's chord. That's,
oh my God.
That's what you could write that scene, which would be pretty funny.
Yeah. I'm curious. I want to know your headcanons about which X-Men actually have, I don't mean good taste in music per se, quote unquote good. I mean like which X-Men have put a lot of thought into music. Like, I mean, obviously Dazzler, but who's put a lot of thought and energy into thinking and listening to music?
It's really true. Like, I find it mostly sort of like, I don't know, Scott, I find interesting because I don't think he listens to, you know what I mean? But I can imagine he listens to some nice AOR, you know what I mean? Like, there's something quite like, really nice middle of the road records, which I find quite, I don't imagine like him, Scott listening to the Doobie Brothers or something. Like,
I believe it. He's such a dad. So sure.
Honestly, Scott's dad rock energy would be very real. Oh, remember on the council, I can't imagine like Eric or like, Eric and Charles, I can't imagine listening to anything but like, classical and austere modern classical, if they were going to, and Eric wouldn't, Eric could probably have very strong opinions of what counts as human music as well. I'm just going around the cast. Hope probably isn't to music that much, but she probably picked up some from her friends. You know what I mean? Like, I feel Hope almost feels like, she spent most of her years growing up in the middle of a desert. First of all, she's that person who grew up in Canada whose parents wouldn't let her watch TV. So like, she's not up to date on pop culture or, so everything's a bit weird and new to her. And I can imagine her picking something and then, I quite like this, and her friends rolling their eyes at her. Like, imagine Velociddad, if Velociddad was still around going,
I love
that's
him.
not cool. It's not cool, Hope. It's not cool. I know you're trying to be cool. But I like this record. Poor Hope. I really love it. I imagine Kate is okay. I imagine Nightcrawler's okay. Kate and Nightcrawler would lean that way. I don't think Irene or Raven are usually pop music people, but you never know.
So Destiny having a seizure during a particular musical performance was not actually connected to her experiencing of the music at all. It was just,
maybe it's dangerous for like Irene. Maybe the synesthesia is the problem because music is very powerful. So maybe it's the idea. Anything that triggers visions is risky for Irene, I guess. I'm now creating a headcanon right there. But you know what I mean? That's kind of obviously that opening for me was very much about art and the idea of how things would resonate differently, because obviously it's not what I'm really interested in Destiny's gifts. I've said this in other interviews, but like, she's probably the biggest X-Men character who's appeared in the least number of issues. You know what I mean? In terms of her impact in the in the larger story. So getting to write her with Raven, and also write a bit more about the history together, because like, we can finally say it's my wife. We can finally say that. But also dig into how Destiny sees the future. I'm really interested in that. So then when we get to her focus issue, we go quite hard into, okay, how does the GIF work?
That's so exciting.
Hopefully we nail it. It's tricky because it's like, seeing the future is a difficult power to do in comics because you need to give it limitations people know, but also strengths as well. Otherwise it's just, especially I don't want to say any more before we spoil anything. We're definitely in the first issue, you get a lot of the energy because the whole kind of, the Sinister, Nathaniel and Irene, let's go first names. The Nathaniel Irene energy for the first issue is, I find it very funny and delightful. Chrissy described, my wife heard me talking about Nathaniel Essex, and at least part of the joy at the first issue is how, he thinks he's completely controlled and then he falls on his face. And she described it, he's Fraser, Fraser Crane. And it's like, he's the, you know what I mean? And that's very true. He's this abstractly very intelligent person who you're really going to enjoy seeing fuck up.
So does that also mean that he's a stupid person's idea of a smart person, as that internet meme would That's interesting too.
He is a little bit, it's the layers of that, as in like, especially because he's performing a smart person's idea, especially because it's how he's chosen to perform. You know what I mean? Like he literally programmed himself to be more charming. Essentially, that's how I wrote it.
Right.
Well, charming is probably not the right word. He programmed himself to be a better irritant.
I like that. I should actually dial back and ask you, like, what is your connection to the X-Men as characters? Because you, as someone who got into comics at a slightly older age, you might have a different relation to the X-Men than a lot of us do.
I do, and that's tricky. I think part of it is the fact I did come in late means that I lack some of the deep continuity and the deep affection. When I say, that's for the wrong word, the deep connection in terms of my own autobiography. Like my understanding of the X-Men, I always loved the X-Men, but it's patchy. I talk about I read 2 American X-Men comics when I was a kid, and I think it's 205 and 207. The second one was the Black, was like the Hellfire Club and the X-Men versus Nimrod in the park, when Harry Leland goes.
Those are some good issues.
It's a good issue. But you pick it up, and I don't know anything. I don't know who any of these characters are. I don't know why they're here. I don't know who this big pink robot is. I don't know, who's this lady in their underwear? Why is this Rachel Grey person hurt who stabbed her? I guess it's Wolverine. Who's this person with 4 arms at the end? I loved it. And that kind of the idea, there's partly the idea of, whilst every issue is the first version of this issue, you can also make it really compelling as a thing by itself. Like you go, who are these people? And I hope with my first, so I'm always kind of writing for that newcomer, as in how can I try to explain these characters the best I can in a small way as possible. And that's at least some reason why I try to get characters like X's or Sinister down to a core which people can grasp. Because if you can explain the core simply, people, I get this person a bit, and then everything else is depth. You know what I mean? You want the arrowhead to a character for me. If you had to critique me, occasionally that arrowhead might be too blood for somebody who wants the assumption that you know the characters well enough to know what's going on with them all the time. I want to restate everything as much as possible. And also it's because I stress more recent continuity. Like I stress what character's been doing for the last 5 years is what I most look at. And then I also look at the big stuff. You know what I mean? I think you as an X fan, you can do that in your head in terms of what are the most important stories to Magneto, and you'll list them off the top of your head, and you also, and what they've been up to recently. And that's what I kind of try to drill my stuff down to, because that allows you to have continuity to the stories people have been reading, but also and the big stuff which people really care about. Because that's the other thing with X-Men. There's so many stories about all the characters, and some of them are kind of contradictory. So you've always got to edit. And that's kind of how I see. You may notice I've gone from my personal attachment to stuff to my higher level stuff. My personal attachment is definitely the push and pull between. I read because the stuff they were reprinting as a kid in the UK were mainly like 60s X-Men. So I was reading 60s X-Men at the same time as 80s X-Men. And that, so you don't really have any idea of the long form continuity per se. Yeah. And then of course there's also the X-Men in pop culture that you pick up on, like, the cartoons, the video games, the movies, and I think the first actual ongoing X-Men book I read as it was coming out was Grant's. That's when I came into comics. So it's kind of that was introducing me to a lot of this stuff. I guess, of course, you can sort of see that with some of the characters I really like. Like, I've never read Emma Frost before Grant's Emma Frost, just because the way I read comics. So that's kind of someone I immediately, this is my favorite person. You know what I mean? So like, it's weird because it's so weird that you always feel like a faker if you haven't been reading it since all the way from if I was 5 and reading it continuity wise. But I've sort of just realised when saying this, I've been reading X-Men comics for 20 years non-stop now. That's
exactly. It's a lot, and it's a lot of the very relevant things. So, I was just curious because, I figured it was a Grant Morrison sort of an answer too. So,
yeah, it's interesting. Like, you definitely pick up. They just seem really resonant, and I definitely have a hot take on what I like about the X-Men. And I'd rather not say it because if you say it, immediately you offend all the fans who that isn't their hot take. What is the X-Men at a core to you? Especially because some of the books, of course, will be more covering that area than what I'm doing, so that kind of, only part of the joy of the X-Men, it's amorphous. It's endless. It can be so many different things. One of the things I often say is like, X-Men are unique in terms of major franchises in that they are defined, they're undefined. They're called the X-Men. In other words, anyone who is an X-Man, which is a term that can be broadly defined to whatever, it can be a lead in the book. And that also means that, that's why heroes become villains and villains become heroes so much in the X-Men, because none of it's solid. It's about a community of people. It's about this whole broader idea of mutantdom. And that means you can, and that's one of the geniuses of the Hotpox Jonathan created area, is that, let's just bring all the villains on board and let's put them all in the same room because they're so good when they get to talk to each other, and like, that is one of the things I find that's why the X-Men as a concept is so exciting, I guess. And that's one of the reasons why so much of the spin-offs tend to be like team books as well. Because as a team book, it's like, it's nesting dolls. It's team books inside team books inside team books.
It's team to the core.
Yeah.
Was there something in particular about the Hickman relaunch of X-Men? Like, what was the thing that most blew your mind and most made you excited to come back and to write in this world?
It's a big question, that one. I was just really bold. I think it's the same reason everyone liked it at the start, as in like, Marv, Jonathan had asked for the space and Marvel had given it him and they were doing it. Like, here we go, like 2 6-issue minis released, back and forth, except when they weren't released back and forth. That's probably my favourite minor detail, as in like, it wasn't just 1 2 1 2 1 2. It was like 1 2 2 2 1 1. Like, because this is a better way for it to be released. And I can imagine the argument Jonathan had with somebody over that. And Jonathan was like, nope, that's how it works. And how they brought the data pages in, the integrate. I mean, I think this is one of the areas where me and John have been quite like traveling similar road. Like, there's I've always done like lots of text pages in my comics. I've just like, John's a designer, so he can do more stuff than I ever was able to. And the idea of like what you can do with text, because, text is also image. Bringing that in, and just the enormous boldness of it, I guess. And how it paid off, and it really made. I mean, Jonathan doing Hoxpox was at least part of the reason why I decided to do Eternals, because I knew Marvel was a place you could do fun stuff like that again. In the same way I imagine like when New X-Men happened, New X-Men was proof that you could do a book like New X-Men at Marvel.
Right. No, that's very true. And, like with the Eternals we spoke about when you were here before, like you're sort of getting invited to reinvent like what is an Eternals book for the 21st century. And now you're going to be heading up this X-Men Eternals crossover event, which I'm really excited about now that because you're the one writing it. You had said something to me before we went live about your approach to their conflict between each other.
I'm writing Eternals. I'm also writing like a big X-Men book. And I've been using a lot of the Avengers stuff in Eternals, and people are always nervous about like crossovers, and like, well, for lots of reasons. But like, in case it derails their books is one of the main ones. Yeah. And for me, this emerges aggressively from where the books are. Like, the inciting incident is absolutely stuff from the X Office. It's stuff from the Eternals books, and it's coming to the surface. I hope it feels bought. You know what I mean? That's actually that was part of my figures. Oh no, this isn't like, I view this more like, okay, for X readers, this should be more like Inferno than it is like Avengers versus X-Men or whatever. Like,
Thank
the idea,
well.
I highly enjoyed Avengers versus X-Men, but the idea of like, this is something which absolutely comes from something we've been building towards. And the flip of it is that whilst it's got multiple acts, and I don't really want to talk about the later acts, but the first act is, it's Avengers versus, X-Men versus Eternals, but I'm explicitly black hatting the Eternals from the start. Like, the Eternal Society at this point are good. The people who've been reading the book are good Eternals. The people who've been mainly following have left Eternal Society. And that, of course, has pretty much pushed Eternal Society to a worse direction because they're no longer in it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of like they're starting, I don't want to say exactly what the inciting incident is and who's in charge and what they're doing, but that kind of like, oh yeah, the Eternals acting against the mutants is an act of aggression. And it's tied into a variety of other things. Our good Eternals are horrified too. The Avengers have no idea what's going on. That's
their role, right? Avengers have no idea what's going on. Yeah.
It's really writing a crossover, but trying to write the entire Marvel universe simultaneously is really hard because it really is. I'm looking at 20 pages for an issue. And go, but having the Avengers who have both the Eternals and the X-Men have kept their secrets from them, which is really useful for a storytelling purpose. That means the Avengers discovering stuff is like the way we introduce it to the other people. Because X-Men readers won't have been reading Eternals. Eternals may not have been reading X-Men. And, you know, the idea of having characters who come in and act as readers surrogate early on to go, huh?
Nice.
It's good. And especially it's good. We said earlier about the different areas of the Quiet Council. Like the mutantdom is complicated now. Different characters will have different responses to the situation they find themselves in. And that's fun, you know, especially the whole first act. Like it's very much Eternals doing enormous, excellent, awful technologies, and the X-Men and having to deal with this. And that's interesting. I hope people, we're from these events is months away, but that kind of like Sentinels on steroid approach, if you will. Because like, you know, if you had a million years to build your death robots, they're somewhat spectacular. That's a really big, dramatic, also political because there's other stuff going on. And then the second act changes things up and becomes something subtly different. Like, I definitely, my aim is to have something that is as big as the widescreen superhero stuff I genuinely love, but also has a bit of style into it. There's some real philosophical stuff, I think, in the mix. And personal. This is about like both world-scale devastation, but really drills down to people's, so what's life for? You know? That's kind of what I want. And God knows if I can land it, because I'm definitely overreaching as always. But like, Valerio makes it look really pretty.
I'm sure. I'm excited. I'm also glad to sort of hear where the story is coming from with that.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like at the same time, I don't want to say it's not to say everyone's in the wrong, which is but I'm not writing. I'm writing a more complicated position in terms of like, you know what I mean? There was always that. There's definitely some people think the Eternals are in the right, but I think we're going to side against them. You know, like
yeah.
I try to write characters' complexities, especially like. No, I can't say that. So the biggest problem about doing a crossover that's so much coming out of what the books are doing means that anything I say about the inciting instance is spoiling the next few issues of comics.
Got it.
You know,
we don't need to do that. That's
you know, it's really, and it makes it difficult to hype it is the thing because you know if you release any preview art, people go, "Ooh," you know.
That certainly was our response to seeing the cover for this first issue come out, the Last Supper cover, which is just so rich with references and details. Did you work with Mark Brooks on that, or like where did those pieces come from?
I did. The idea of something being picked over like a game is obviously so much my jam, but like no, 100% Mark's idea to do it. He was like, I want to do He said, I want to do a last Supper homage with all the Quiet Council and all as many references for the future of the book as possible on it. And I went, sure. So I sent him a very long email of things he could put on there and references and working out, okay, this is where you should put this member of the, this apostle is this Quiet Council member. And then the whole thing is absolutely meant to be picked over. And to be honest, more looked at in retrospect in that kind of way, like, it won't be, but all of it was kind of, the stuff has been put there for a reason. You know, I gave Mark a lot of stuff and Mark ran with it.
Well, I'm always struck by the description of our two lobsters there from the JML's Explain the X-Men podcast of there being the lobsters that are the protagonists of Die Hard. So we're now seeing that on a cover, perhaps to be. But let's find out. I have a sort of a question that's bridging the sections of what we're talking about here. Marvel has had at times different tabletop RPG games. Have you thought about how an X-Men, this is a question from friend of the show, John Arminio. Have you thought about how an X-Men tabletop RPG might work? Has there been conversations with Marvel about creating such a thing?
Well, I don't think about But so, tell you what I want to do. Like, I'm restarting Decompressed. I'm doing my old.
Yay! We got a question. It's like, is he going to restart Decompressed?
Like, I'm interviewing the X Office basically. So I want to talk to everyone about their books they come out basically, or for the people who are doing books that are ongoing at the end of the article. I'll work out a reason. And I'm a new father, so God knows if I'll actually finish it all. But I've got 3 in the can already and edited. Decompressed, for those who don't know, is my kind of like craft podcast where I interview creators. And the one I would love to ask Jonathan about, like, I don't know how I can drag Jonathan back. It's like, what has Jonathan played RPGs? Is Jonathan an old teenage gamer? Because I don't think he games now, but there's something about Jonathan that makes me, that amazing bit in New Mutants where the fight scene when it was all based on dice. That was so funny. And also so much the sort of thing I would imagine I would write. And I always imagine like Jonathan has an RPG or something somewhere, or at least a source book. To answer the question, however, no. I must admit, superhero RPGs are a little bit close to like where I eat. Like, there's a really good game called Masks, if you have heard of it. Masks is the Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's explicitly about running teenage superheroes. And
that is my favorite system, Powered by the Apocalypse.
You grab Masks. It's what it does is it absolutely gets how superhero comics work, which isn't about the who is stronger. And it's okay, let's follow the emotional trauma. And as people go up and down and they, you actually defeat the bad guy, but you end up, your friends look down on you by how you did it.
Right,
all that. And it's all about the emotion. And then you kind of have scenes where you're having hearts to hearts and you heal each other's conditions. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. So it's all about that really the big teenage powerful emotions. And if you were going to do a classic X-Men story, like, at the mansion as teenagers and having all that kind of like drama and kissing and stuff, grab Masks and run with that. That's what I would do. And it's quite weird. One reason I've never ran it is I said, it's a bit close to what I do, but literally it's got like bits of Young Avengers quotes as moves, because people who don't understand Power by the Apocalypse works with these things called moves, and moves are basically a trigger that happens in the fiction. So if somebody chooses to attack somebody, this happens. And quite often they name the moves. And some of the moves are literally quotes from various comics, and some of which are Young Avengers. So it's quite close to my day job.
Wow. Yeah.
But like, if I was going to do a classic X-Men, I would do that. The other way of doing it, though, there's a game which is, it was in beta, but I think they pulled the beta to release it in a new edition. Have they kickstarted? Yeah, I forgot. Apocalypse Keys. Apocalypse Keys is kind of like Hellboy's clearly the other influence. But if you're going to do like a Days of Future Past adult horror version of the X-Men, I kind of wanted to run in Apocalypse Keys, as you could do a really kind of like quite creepy version of it. But in terms of an adult, in terms of like a Krakoan Era book, I can't think of a system that off the top of my head that would run it in, which is an interesting problem, You never know. Maybe I will.
Well, those are some exciting answers. So thank you. We've come upon the end of Die. We're going to be getting a beautiful hardcover book of it with you and Stephanie coming out.
November,
not
I
sure.
think. Yes.
When?
November, I believe.
Just in time for a holiday gift season.
Yes.
I've been, I've been thinking a lot, obviously, about the series and some of the themes that connect between that and actually some of your other work. Both Die and the Eternal seem to have a lot of themes in common around the question of like making choices with consequences, and when you're aware of that and when you're sort of trying to avoid considering it.
My creator own and work for hire, there's always a rhythm, as in I take the lessons I learned from those projects back into it. And just that's what Jonathan, if you're talking about Jonathan with Hoxpox, if you go look at Black Monday Murders, that's him taking, Hoxpox is him doing Black Monday Murders at Marvel, in terms of all the lessons they did there. And there's a bit like that. I go and do a book like Die and What's the Future simultaneously and play with some stuff and go, okay, what can I apply back? And in case of Eternals, there's all the questions about rules and decisions, but also with Eternals, it's the deep world building. It's the idea of like the Tolkien-esque aspect of what I learned from Tolkien. I try to apply with Eternals. So actually with Immortal, the technique I'm really bringing back is the tight character focus. Like I described it elsewhere as Neo-Claremontism, which is just the sort of nonsense I like saying. But the idea of like, let's do because captions are really full balloons. And I think if there's something people aren't going to like about my first issue of Immortal, is it's very captiony. There's a lot of talking, and that's partially because Sinister's talky, but it's also partially because I'm trying to get people up to date. As I know, I want people to be able to hear his, once again, I'm thinking about newcomers as well as people who are reading the books already. So Sinister, as somebody who knows a lot more than you would think, is also explaining a lot. So the captions calm down the more you go into it. But at the same time, we're also it allows you to have a tight focus on characters' perspectives. And so, like, in the same way, we followed Ash quite tightly in Die, and we really got to see what she was thinking about the world around her. And you got lots of bits where you dance between, someone says something, and they have a caption between it, then another line from them. So you get that kind of like tight focus on the emotionality. That's one of my major tools as I move around the Quiet Council, you know? And the other element I think that comes from Die is the gamemanship of it. You know, like Die is, whilst it's more formalized than the politics of the Quiet Council, there is kind of that vote aspect. You know, the Die is about, do you go home or not? And we've all got to agree. And the Quiet Council is, a lot of people, it's so, like, I think the major action set piece in issue 1 of, like, Immortal is the vote sequence. You know what I mean? That's always like, it's a slow motion Miller, Frank Miller-esque fight scene, but done with votes. It's like,
I love it. But like, look, the thing is, X-Men fans are good with a talky comic. Like, they came up on Claremont, which is just, even if they didn't come up on Claremont, X-Men it's good for X-Men to be talky, actually. And I wouldn't worry about like, oh, there's not, I have yet to hear, and maybe it's just that I talk to mostly other queer X-Men fans, but I've yet to hear anybody ever say there wasn't enough punching in an X-Men thing and that there was too much feelings and too much talking.
I hope so. But it's like, you know, you always worry about a little bit. But different. I think it's necessary. I think it's one of the things when you read, especially when you read Immortal issue 1, I kind of hope people go, oh, I see what they're doing. And like, I think it's like, you could be treated in lots of ways, but I'm quite proud of how confident it is. Like, I think it's the main thing I've learned over the last decade is a bit more, to be more comfortable in myself, in that kind of, hey, this is what we're doing. Do you want to come along? If so, great. If not, well, I'll see you around, and that's cool too. You know, there's, I hope so. Anyway, you tell me, you've read it.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I was like, what kind of sucks is that I wanted to be able to talk with Kieron when we're farther in the series too, because like, you know, I'm not the kind of person who like wants to do conversations about speculation. I want to have conversations about the text, and we only have this small piece of it, but it certainly made me very excited to read and hear more. I hope we will get to talk more about that series later on, because and then this combined one of X-Men versus Eternals, I am now very excited about.
Drag me back whenever I finish. Drag me back. And then we're gonna have the dismount interview, and we'll see how things have turned out.
Speaking of things turning out, I think that other than Meg, Mog, and Owl, which did a whole like story and released as a book taking place during COVID that was about the gang's response and dealing with COVID crisis, I think the ending of Die is the first comic I've read that actually, like, that wasn't like a news comic or like a journal comic that actually had COVID in it. And that was really sort of like this crazy moment to suddenly see on the page. And obviously it wasn't part of the original plan for the story because you began the story so much longer ago. How did you feel about like writing COVID into the ending of the comic?
It was really weird. As you say, it was like, that we didn't plan it. And I know people have been looking at it as funny in Die when it said, oh, the world ends in 2020 as part of our plot. And it's like, look, I better not have Alan Moored it, you know. But with the case of Die, I was like, well, that's what it is then. And I've had various reviews say it gives it a weird sort of scourging of the Shire energy, you know, like you go away.
Oh shit, yeah.
You know, and that's not deliberate, obviously, because I couldn't plan COVID. But the reality of it was very important in this kind of like, you know, Die. In fact, there's a big chunk of my work which is aggressively set in a period of time. Like almost all my Krakoan work is set in a period, and I try to ground it. And once I'd bought into, they've got to come back in 2020, early 2020, that means COVID. And it's like, oh, I'm just committed to writing that then, because that's what reality means. So like, it felt weird to write it. It felt very weird to draw it. And obviously the aesthetic effect was tricky because it definitely took some people out of the comic. But at the same time, I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the comic does. Not that that's a problem. If you lose, if someone gets lost over something they've lost, then that's fine. But like, it felt like powerful and sad, and especially when you realise, obviously, what happened with Matt's dad, or what didn't happen with Matt's dad in the comic. The idea of like all the sort of fear I would have over the separation of my mum coming out and all that, because, you know, my mum's higher this category and lots of reasons. So there's lots of things. I mean, one of the weird things about Die was it's about the concept of Die being about escapism. Like escapism has never been more attractive in those sort of 2 years, really, was it? Like, right. In terms of like, it may, and whatever we ever do a Die sequel, I expect so much of the thinking that happened in that year will more actively go into it. But yeah, it felt like a weird bit of testimony as this is where we were.
I think it was important because I don't know how helpful it is for people to continue to pretend that this hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And it feels like people are returning to pretending that it isn't happening, which is actually going to make things worse. So thank you. I have a question, a piece of advice I'd like to try to get from you.
Okay.
Let's say you're a player in an RPG game and you're playing in an RPG game where the DM has made it very clear that this is a world in which the players are supposed to be able to dictate a lot of the direction things are headed in. I'll just say it's point of information. Like we're playing Blades in the Darkness or whatever. And yet I feel like we're kind of there's a thing that the quest was basically asking us to do that we didn't feel comfortable doing. And we tried to find a way around it, and it didn't work. And now I feel like we're getting railroaded into it, and it's kind of making me not look forward to the game. It's kind of depressing. How do you feel like players can get something like that back on track?
Well, it's I think most things there's a lot of really useful out of game tools, which I encourage. I mean, the single tool I get most recommending to people, because the thing I get quite a lot of people say, hey, I'm playing this game. It's normally a D&D game and I'm not enjoying it. And I can't tell my GM that I'm not enjoying it because it's socially awkward. There's a tool called Stars and Wishes. And Stars and Wishes, for listeners who don't know about it, is at the end of a session, you have this thing where you go on the table and people can say stars and wishes if you like. Everyone, including the GM. And stars are basically affirmative things, as in, oh, I love this, or I loved it when you did this thing, or that whole bit in the dungeon was amazing. And it's generally positive stuff around the table. This is useful for lots of reasons, partially because you often walk away from the table. Okay, it makes you bond as a group for a start. And it makes you appreciative. Like one of the things PBTA games say a lot is, be a fan of other characters. That's the GM. Mm-hmm. But everyone being a fan of everyone else. Like the idea of you saying stars is saying people were seen as it's also encouraging behavior. You know what I mean? That thing you did was cool. All that stuff. Wishes is the other way around. Wishes are kind of something you would like to see happen in the future. Now, wishes can be absolutely just positive stuff, as in, I can't wait to see what happens when we trace down the NPC and get our revenge. Which, of course, does tell that, if a GM was thinking, that NPC was never going to come back, the GM now thinks, right, maybe I'll bring them back because the players are into it, It's clear, but it's also a really very good way to give soft negative feedback. As in, I'm kind of way of putting it. There's just too much fight. I would love to have a more conversation-based, a more downtime episode when we're not trying to murder everyone. Or hey, or let's say let's say the quest is something like, you're trying to assassinate someone. I'm not really, I kind of like the idea of our group getting away from this murder plot a bit. You know what I mean? So it's a way of giving feedback, negative feedback in a safer way, because it's always sandwiched around positivity too. It's also a way for GM to give feedback to the players, as in, because the GM, especially in PBTA, the GM's a player as well. In fact, most games, the GM's a player as well, in my opinion. So there's partially that. But I think the problem with the GM is definitely the mixed message there, in that if you've got something the campaign is going to be about, you get buy-in at the start. If it's kind of we're going to do a game about this kind of stuff. This is what I would like to do. Have we got affirmative, exciting consent to do this game? You know what I mean? And if they haven't properly aligned the players' expectations of what they would want to be doing, that's when a lot of the problems come up. So it's I know this is too late to do that in that example, but there is partially that. Later on, it's almost asking the GM. A lot of communication problems are. Well, actually, hey GM, with this whole kind of this plot here, are we committed to this? That kind of thing. I think a lot of stuff is just out of game communication done politely. Or politely with respect and love, because you're doing this stuff together, especially in PBTA where or Blaze in the Dark, which is a Forged in the Dark system, where the GM's making it all up anyway. It's not like the GM has a plan. They're going to be responsive over what you're doing. when I run Forge in the Dark games, I'll tell you this, is like the weirdest thing about Forge in the Dark, even over PBTA, is I quite often suggest things the players should do in a way I would never do as a GM in another game, because I have no idea what's going to happen. I could say, like, I would love to see what happens if you try to go through the roof. Because, like, I'm not going to decide, the dice are going to decide what actually happens, and then we'll build off that. So it has a much more writer's room environment. So, like, if your GM is kind of, obviously I don't really know about what the specific situation is, but it just seems
I'm
weird.
trying to keep it general enough that this is useful for people who aren't just me. So that's kind of why.
Oh no, it's definitely complicated between the GM saying like what you want, this is very free, it's about what you want to do, and then making it clear it's actually they want something specifically. And that's a weird contrast, which I'm not quite sure what to say, because it does imply that the GM's either got a conflict inside them or not really being clear and expressing what they thought they were expressing, which is tricky. I mean, so the answer to most of those things is talking. It's definitely one of the things that almost all these games, I said to players at the start, it's like, this game works better if your characters have powerful desires. Like, the first Forge game I ever ran, Blades in the Dark, the characters, since they didn't really have very powerful desires, they end up burning down all of the Crow's Foot area just by kind of playing all the gangs against each other without realizing they're trying to keep everyone friendly, but everyone else wants to murder each other. So eventually they just end up like losing all the power structure, and then everyone ends up the entire area ends up in poverty and everyone murders each other. And they're like, oops. You know what I mean? They kind of like try to be nice to everyone to disaster. And if he actually had something positive, as in, oh no, I want to become the crime lord of this gang. You know what I mean? That's suddenly something the GM can respond to. So that's one of those things where I'm confused, where the GM said it's a lot about player freedom, but still giving you such a firm, this is what we're doing. Especially in like Blade in the Dark, where explicitly it's, you get to decide what missions you go on. Like, you just say, nope, not interested. I'm going to go, let's go rob the Dimmer sisters instead.
Right.
We just really hate the Dimmer sisters now.
Yeah. No, I think the importance of communication and clarity and what your goals are from a game is like also like a big thing in Die, right?
Absolutely. It's a joke I put in the manual of Die. Is that if only like Solid had been much more clear about the boundaries in the game before they started playing.
Oh my God.
You need some lines and veils there.
Oh, it's brutal. I'm still definitely very much sitting in my feelings, because I took another look at, the end of Die when we spoke to prep for this, and I'm like, still very much in my feelings on it.
It's a lot. I'm really proud of it, honestly. It's like that we got to do it. Like, I'm really, really proud of that work.
Oh, yeah. And it seems like there's a game community, from it that's an ongoing thing, like this is a real thing.
Yeah.
Have you guys considered doing, I personally, I'm not a big fan of live play performances, except, have you guys considered doing a live play performance of Die?
Well, have you I'm not sure if I've got one online. I did one for Thought Bubble a few years ago, and it's me, Chip, Ed Brubaker, Matt Fraction,
Jesus,
Margaret Bennett, Emma Viscelli, and obviously me. And there was a short, 2.5 hour game. It's a very quirky scenario. It's set at a Comic Con, and it's basically everyone is playing people who used to make a hit indie comic together, but failed to become a TV show.
I love it.
Meta. Yeah. And it's like, it's 2.5 hours, and people seem to enjoy it. It's the truest shit you'll ever see, as people have said. It's like, oh yeah, this started as comedy, but this has become a much darker take on the comic book industry. So that's definitely out there. I mean, we're heading towards the crowdfunding for the full retail edition of the Die RPG, which should be a few months. It's definitely, it'll be in summer. There's presently a Kickstarter page, which Rookrow and Deckard, who are a British indie company, who'll be running it and publishing it. So I definitely need to stick more videos online of that. I've still got some more playtests to do. Just because it's never ended. And it's also kind of touching how many people have played the game, which is nice. It's definitely, it's got to the point where I'm really proud of what it does. And I kind of view it and the comic in the same breath. Yeah. So there's a game I ran for various people before Christmas, and I promised to edit it up, and then we'll see if we want to put it live, because it's an incredibly touching, very powerful, very queer game. We were in tears at different points. It felt incredibly beautiful at different times, and also really moving and funny, very funny. When you got the Mean Girl Gorgons turning up, that kind of stuff. Entire bit with Taylor Swift soundtrack blaring through this city as they're on the run. But I want to edit, that just show it, because the thing with RPGs, you play them in your own way. I mean, I probably said this to you before, but like, I always use the band metaphor. Like, you form a band, and like most things, when a band ain't working, it's because they fail to communicate what they're trying to do, or there's other stuff going on. But really, like, every game you end up making it yourself anyway. So seeing how people have taken Die, like, some people run it very, some people like run it like much like Jumanji, the movies, like really funny and light. It's people in a different world with different powers, and that's a fun way of running it. And I've got people who've run it much more serious than I've ever run it. Like, because I always have a level of like playfulness as well as the heartbreak, but like they go in hard, and it's very bleedy, and it's very emotionally powerful. And it's so weird to have created a work of art, which I think some people are playing better than I am. You know what I mean? And that's wonderful. And that's very powerful. And like, I'm very aware the things that game design tickles are very different to what I get as a creator in other fields, whilst also overlapping. Like, I kind of view my game designers as kind of like criticism. Like, my game design is about me explaining how stories work, and then allowing you to make your own.
That's a really great way to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun. Honestly, it's like, it really clarifies your thinking. When you have to write something down in forms of rules and mechanism and ritual, you're like, there's no rule for like fogginess. It's like me saying, okay, this is what this happens here. These are how these characters are hurt and how they hurt each other. And this is how you get a climax from it. It's really like, I was chatting to various writers about this who are also dabbling in indie design. It's a private conversation. I don't want to name it, but, yeah, it's interesting. It's just indie game design is so incredibly vibrant because it's so small. No, like proper indie RPG game design is like poetry. Like, there's obviously some much bigger games and like some big indie games, but a lot of it's just people doing game poems, these incredibly small little works of art. And I've released like 4 or 5 little short RPGs now on my itch.io page as well as Die. Was it 3 or 4? Something like that. It seems. Itch.io, yeah. And it's like, it's really wholesome to just like, oh, I'm releasing a quick game. It's like a couple of pages. It does this thing. Like, I released a game called Amble, which is about people having a conversation on the phone. So you go for a walk together and you use the things you're seeing on your walk as prompts for a story you're telling each other. And it was very clearly a pandemic game about, trying to share a journey with somebody and enchant it. And there's a lot of that, people doing stuff like that, just little creative exercises of people, which allows you to see the world a different way. And that's what I've always loved about games and, comics and pop music. The idea of this an enchantment of the world we find ourselves in.
That's beautiful.
It was me. That was me doing a sign-off sort of quote, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I was going to be like, God damn it! If I had anything else to ask, it wouldn't be good at this point. So,
what else? Hit me.
Okay, this is light, and I might actually do nonlinear editing in order to make this work, which is going to break me. Because that was such an amazing sign-off.
Honestly, the fake out ending is great, isn't it? That was a big dramatic ending. Then we do it human style.
No. Okay, which X-Men who hasn't gotten a gala look do you really needs to have a gala look?
Oh no, I've got to. I'll probably go to forget a gala look now. Well, Destiny hasn't been there for one yet, has she?
No.
Exactly. She's been dead for a long time. Give the girl a dress.
I was like, I saw amazing fan art of it, so I had to remind myself, is that real? No, that was all fan art. This hasn't happened yet. So very exciting. This answer might be more of a point of information and answer. So I forget, is there a narrative reason why the UK doesn't recognize Krakoa, or this is still us thinking about politics there? Did I just not read it because I didn't read every single comic that?
It would be in Excalibur somewhere. I've forgotten.
Okay, it is related to that then.
I mean, it's almost certainly it's basically the prickliness of the UK broadly in the story that was being set up there, and it's quite nice to have something like that.
Yes.
I mean, I use that in issue 2, but I'm not going to mention any more about that.
Fair enough. Okay, yeah, I would love to see Kieron talk about the specificity of the UK not recognizing Krakoa, but I wasn't sure if I'd literally had that explained. But that doesn't mean there isn't more to say on it anyway. So, Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate the conversations we have. Tell our listeners the best way to keep up with your work online.
Well, the best way to find me is probably my newsletter is the best way, which is Kieron Gillen at buttondown.com. But I would really just go to my website, KieronGillen.com, and that links to most of my places, that aforementioned newsletter, which is every time I have a comic out, I try to send a newsletter. I'm on Twitter, not very seriously. Like I kind of keep a distance on it now, but like
Yeah.
I make crap jokes quite regularly and retweet stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're probably the two main places to find me. And also in the shelves of your comic book stores now in Immortal X-Men #1, Kieron Gillen and Lucas Werneck.
Indeed. Really excited to have you working at Marvel while also having these really great projects for us to jump in as well.
Thank you.
As for me, I am Ilana_Brooklyn, ELANA_Brooklyn on Twitter, where I am a little too much. Graphic Policy Radio, we're going to be continuing to cover conversations with your favorite comics artists and writers, as well as having roundtables around various other superhero adjacent media as it comes to us. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.